Number 8. Dillian Thompson and Dorian Walker Gaines. In January of 2015, a pair of Texas men in their early 20s stole an iPad, a laptop, and $5,000 in cash from an unlocked truck parked outside a home in River Oaks, a residential community in Houston. The suspects, later identified as Dillian Thompson and Dorian Walker Gaines, reportedly brought the stolen items to a nearby Burger King to celebrate. In a video they subsequently filmed on the pilfered iPad, the young men dubbed themselves the Money Team and openly displayed the cash they'd taken from the vehicle, which was later determined to have been owned by a man named Randy Schaefer. The recording, which was automatically uploaded to Schaefer's iCloud, was obtained by a friend of the victims, who posted a picture of the burglars on social media. The photos immediately went viral online, and local police were ultimately able to use them to identify Thompson and Walker Gaines as the perpetrators of the theft. In late January, they were both arrested and charged in connection to the incident. The following month, the two thieves, whose celebratory selfies had unwittingly given the police everything they needed to catch them, were sentenced to 5 years of community supervision in lieu of jail time. Number 7. The DeWitt Township crime spree. A pair of Michigan teenagers accused of taking part in a crime spree that spanned multiple counties were arrested on the morning of April the 25th of 2018. According to the Lansing State Journal, the suspects had broken into the homes of several residents in the Cadgwith Farms retirement community in DeWitt Township. As was later detailed by the local police chief, the teens preyed on the elderly, who were their favorite targets for home invasions. On April the 12th, they allegedly stole a gun out of a vehicle that was parked in the community. That same night, while residents were sleeping, they broke into 3 homes and took various items, including a cell phone. One of the suspects, an unnamed 18-year-old, reportedly used the phone they'd stolen to take selfies, which the authorities were able to use to track him down to a home in Lansing. In the early hours of April the 25th, officers who'd been staking out the retirement community for about 2 weeks spotted the teenagers in a stolen car. A high-speed chase subsequently ensued through the community's circular drive, but the 18-year-old eventually lost control of the vehicle and swerved into a ditch. The teens were then arrested for the thefts and also reportedly faced criminal charges in connection to unrelated larcenies in Ingham and Eastern counties. Number 6. Dean Smith. On April the 15th of 2014, 27-year-old Dean Smith walked into a Barclays bank in the Welsh town of Treorchy in order to inform the staff that he'd changed his home address. While he was interacting with the employees at the branch, Smith reportedly noticed tills full of cash and promptly devised a plan to rob the very bank where he was already a customer. Only 30 minutes after initially departing from the branch, Smith returned and demanded money armed with a bread knife and wearing a hooded jacket, sunglasses, and socks over his shoes. The paltry disguise did little to conceal his identity from the bank tellers, who immediately recognized him from his earlier visit and pressed the panic button, raising an alarm that automatically notified local authorities of the situation. Smith fled the scene empty-handed and was later taken into police custody at the address he'd just relayed to the bank's employees that same day. In his subsequent interviews with investigators, the failed bank robber expressed contrition for his actions, which he called stupid, but indicated that he was desperate for money. During a trial at Merthyr Tydfil Crown Court the following month, Smith pleaded guilty to attempted robbery and carrying a bladed weapon, and was consequently sentenced to 2.5 years behind bars. Number 5. The Salmo bike crash. During a cycling event held on the Canary Island of El Hierro on October the 23rd of 2021, a competitor was knocked to the ground by an oblivious female spectator who'd wandered onto the course. The incident occurred near the finish line of the 54-mile race, known as the Cicloturista Condasa Salmo bike event, as was captured on cell phone footage taken by other nearby spectators. The unnamed male cyclist had been nearing the end of the course when the woman inexplicably walked into the road. The video, which promptly went viral online in the incident's aftermath, showed the fan looking down at her phone as she attempted to cross over to the other side of the street. She unwittingly moved directly into the oncoming cyclist's path, triggering a violent collision that reportedly cost him a first-place finish in the competition. Medical personnel already present at the scene treated the woman for non-serious injuries. The cyclist was said to have suffered a moderate head injury and memory loss as a consequence of the crash, and he was taken to a nearby hospital for more intensive treatment. As of the latest updates on the case, the police in El Hierro had launched an official investigation into the matter. Number 4. Yoni Jones. On the night of December the 12th of 2021, 3 women were captured on surveillance footage robbing the beauty plug supply shop in Tamara, Florida. One of the suspects was carrying an infant child throughout the commission of the crime, while another appeared to have been pregnant. The women stole several items, including multiple wigs, and sprayed mace at an employee who was later revealed to be the shop owner's daughter. Tamarack police reviewed the security video taken from the night of the incident, whereupon they were able to positively identify 18-year-old Yoni Jones as the individual who'd pepper sprayed the store worker. Local authorities had little trouble tracking down the identities of the thieves, largely due to the fact that they had made no effort to conceal themselves from the surveillance cameras positioned throughout the shop. Jones, having been charged with robbery with a weapon, was held in custody on a $25,000 bond. Court records indicated that she also faced 15 additional charges stemming from separate cases still pending in Broward County Court. Number 3. Shannon Sapia. A blonde vandal from Stamford, Connecticut, was arrested in August of 2015 after misspelling the word whore in the taunting message she'd keyed into her friend's car. According to subsequent reports, the suspect, identified as 20-year-old Shannon Sapia, had targeted her friend's vehicle after growing suspicious that she'd been carrying on an affair with her ex-boyfriend. Investigators later detailed how a car belonging to Sapia's former partner had also been keyed, and both of the defaced vehicles reportedly had their tires slashed. When initially questioned by Stamford police, Sapia was thoroughly uncooperative. However, the authorities were eventually able to collect enough evidence to arrest the young woman after she allegedly sent damning Snapchat messages to her ex-boyfriend in which she alluded to her involvement in the vandalism incidents. When the details of the case emerged online, particularly regarding the misspelled insult, many were quick to label Sapia as a dumb blonde, in keeping with derogatory stereotypes about the supposed unintelligence of people with blonde hair. Upon being taken into custody, Sapia was charged with 2 counts of criminal mischief. Number 2. Jaster T Hobson. In an effort to crack down on drug possession in Burnett County, Texas, the Granite Shoals Police Department uploaded a fake news alert to their Facebook page on March the 22nd of 2016. The hoax social media post, which reportedly garnered 1,290 shares and more than 200 comments, suggested that supplies of certain illegal substances in the region of Central Texas could have potentially been contaminated with Ebola. The savvy police department thus urged the public to take any drugs in their possession to their local police station or sheriff's office so that they could be screened using a special device. The fake news story was punctuated with the warning, "Do not use the drugs until they have been properly checked for Ebola contamination." Although the vast majority of the population wasn't fooled by Granite Shoals Police's rather blatant attempt to catch unsuspecting drug users, one unwitting individual took their cautionary advice very seriously. 2 days after the post was initially uploaded to Facebook, officers encountered 29-year-old Jaster T Hobson after receiving reports of a suspicious person wandering the streets. She reportedly had a small amount of illegal substances in her possession and asked the police to test it, concerned that her stash of drugs might have been tainted by the deadly virus. The department subsequently announced that they'd heard from their first concerned citizen and had gladly taken the item for further testing. Shortly thereafter, Hobson was arrested and charged with possession of less than 1 gram of a controlled substance. Number 1. Lucas Chanowski. Following a 5-day sightseeing vacation in the summer of 2014, an elderly couple returned to their home in the borough of Pendle in Lancashire, England, to find a strange man in their bed. The intruder, later identified as 28-year-old Lucas Chanowski, had reportedly spent the previous 2 days inside the home, during which time he'd tidied up the house, washed his clothes, gone grocery shopping and cooked himself multiple meals. Chanowski would later tell investigators that he'd been evicted from his own residence and had broken into the couple's house through an open rear window, believing it to be derelict and unoccupied. Upon returning home at around midnight on July the 14th, the homeowners, named as Martin Holtby and Pat Dyson, immediately suspected that someone had broken in because their delivered newspapers had been taken inside and neatly stacked. Shortly thereafter, Holtby came upon Chanowski asleep in the master bedroom and shouted at him to leave. The young man, who reportedly spoke very little English, simply cowered beneath the bed sheets until the couple dialed 999 and the police were dispatched to the scene. In the wake of the incident, Chanowski was given the nickname Goldilocks, in reference to the 19th century British fairy tale in which 3 bears returned to their forest home to find a woman sleeping in their beds. The man ultimately pleaded guilty to burglary charges and was consequently ordered to serve 2 years of probation and pay more than $200 in fines. Number 9. OCB Haluli. In October of 2014, drug dealer OCB Haluli posed for a picture that showed him flaunting roughly $293,000 in cash, the brunt of which he'd allegedly made by selling illegal substances. 24-year-old B. Haluli, along with 2 others from his organization, Besim Topali and Azem Proshka, were subsequently jailed after the police confiscated heroin and cocaine from their residence. B. Haluli had posted pictures on Twitter of him gambling and enjoying a luxurious lifestyle, displaying wads of cash and bragging about the fortune he'd made from his criminal enterprise. Upon his arrest, B. Haluli denied that the money was his, claiming that it belonged to a relative of his in Albania. However, an analysis of the photos B. Haluli had posted proved that they'd been taken in an apartment that he'd previously rented in London. Investigators also came across what was used as a stash house, where they discovered more cash, drugs, counterfeit identity documents, and equipment related to trafficking. B. Haluli was convicted of conspiring to supply Class A drugs and sentenced to 11 years in prison. Topali and Proshka were given sentences of 10 years each after admitting to conspiracy to supply drugs, money laundering, and carrying fake identification. A judge ordered that upon the completion of their sentences, the men were to be deported back to Albania. Number 8. Orlando Henderson. On December the 4th of 2019, North Carolina man Orlando Henderson was arrested for stealing $88,000 from the bank where he worked. A picture of the 29-year-old was found on social media showing him posing with the ill-gotten money. When his employers became suspicious, the FBI got involved and launched an investigation. It revealed that Henderson had been able to pilfer the considerable sum because he'd had direct access to the vault. There were at least 18 different times when he'd stolen cash from deposits that the bank's customers had made. He'd deposited some of it in an ATM not far from his work. According to the authorities, Henderson's motive for stealing the money was for his own personal expenses, including making a $20,000 down payment on a Mercedes-Benz. He'd presented falsified documents and bank statements in order to do so. The pictures he'd posted of himself flaunting wads of cash and showing off his new luxury car were what ultimately led the police to him. Henderson was arrested and charged with 2 counts of financial institution fraud, 19 counts of theft, embezzlement and misapplication, and 12 counts of making false entries, which meant a maximum sentence of 30 years in prison and a $1 million fine per each count. He was also charged with transactional money laundering, for which he faced 10 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. Number 7. Michelle Lewin. Venezuelan fitness model Michelle Lewin was bitten on the backside by a pig in the Bahamas on February the 12th of 2019. She'd gone to an uninhabited area specifically to take pictures with feral pigs that lived there. As the 32-year-old was being recorded frolicking and twirling on the beach, a group of pigs came up to her. One of the animals then bit her directly on her backside. Lewin began screaming and running away as the pigs chased her, while largely unscathed. She did emerge from the incident with a cautionary souvenir in the form of a red bite mark that eventually turned into a bruise. Number 6. Javiata Cornell. In March of 2019, a young girl named Javiata Cornell suffered a serious injury while in the process of taking a selfie in her bathroom. In a recording that captured the incident, Cornell was seen posing for a picture when her younger brother suddenly opened the door, unaware that she was inside. The door hit the girl directly in the face and caused her to fall at an awkward angle, resulting in her needing to be rushed to the hospital. Cornell was told she'd suffered a broken neck and had to use a brace to heal. She went on to make a full recovery, but the incident generated a lot of negative attention from her followers. They called Cornell derogatory names for the type of suggestive content she was making, and her Instagram account has since been deleted. Number 5. Jaime Alvarez. On July the 7th of 2019, a man from California was participating in the annual running of the bulls in Pamplona, Spain, where he was impaled by a bull after ignoring rules that prohibited taking pictures or videos during the event. 46-year-old Jaime Alvarez had already completed the 850-meter run before jumping on a protective fence as the group of bulls were charging by him. Once the animals had passed, Alvarez returned to the arena thinking that it was safe to take out his phone to film. It was then that a lone bull suddenly appeared and charged him. The bull stabbed him in the neck with its horn and fractured his cheekbone. Following the injury, paramedics on site rushed Alvarez to the hospital, where doctors were amazed at how closely the horn had missed his jugular vein. He underwent surgery for over 2 hours, and despite remaining in critical condition after the procedure, he eventually made a full recovery. Alvarez wasn't the only injured bull runner on the day, as 2 other men were reported to have suffered wounds to their thighs. Aware of the event's risks, Pamplona had at the time passed laws making it illegal to take videos, photos, or even hold a distracting device in one's hand on the course. Anyone caught breaking the law risked a fine of up to $4,100. Number 4. Incident in Uttar Pradesh, India. While attending a festival in September of 2016, an unnamed schoolgirl from Uttar Pradesh, India, was trying to take a selfie in front of a Ferris wheel. As she posed for the camera, she got too close to the attraction, and her long hair got caught in the spinning wheel. The ride partially scalped her, leaving her barely conscious as onlookers rushed over to free her from the machine. In a short video that was taken at the scene, the girl's friend was seen trying to comfort her as blood from her injured head soaked her clothing. Eventually, the schoolgirl was freed from the ride and rushed to a nearby hospital, where she received treatment for the injury. She was able to heal and make a full recovery. Number 3. Platini Stallone della Torre Cardoso. A 22-year-old Brazilian man living in London posted pictures of himself showing off bundles of cash that he'd made by forging identity documents in July of 2010. When the British Transport Police pulled Cardoso over during a stop-and-search operation, they found 2 forged Portuguese identification cards and driver's licenses. They arrested him and obtained a search warrant for his apartment, where they discovered equipment used for making forged passports, ID cards, and insurance cards. Among the equipment were stamps, printers, blank cards, paper cutters, and other equipment that Cardoso had used to produce and sell false identity documents. Police also discovered several hundred capsules of a Class C substance that they suspected were also being sold by Cardoso. As the investigation progressed, police found out that Cardoso had opened up bank accounts using the forged documents he'd created, selling both the counterfeit documents and bank accounts as a package deal to his customers. Based on the pictures that he'd posted, police described Cardoso as having a total disregard for the law. He was sentenced to 4 years in jail after pleading guilty to 4 counts of possessing false identification documents, 1 count of possessing apparatus for making false documents, and 1 count of possessing a controlled substance. Following the completion of his sentence, Cardoso was deported to Brazil. Today's topic was requested by Ivares Kessner. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Jack Fenton. On July the 25th of 2022, British tourist Jack Fenton was killed by the tail rotor of a helicopter in Greece while he was taking a picture. During a tour heading to Athens, the 22-year-old was accompanied by 3 friends in the same helicopter while his parents were following in a second helicopter behind them. After Fenton landed at his destination, he got out and began walking around to the back of the helicopter with his phone in his hand, trying to take a picture. No longer focused on his surroundings, Fenton was struck by the aircraft's rear rotor and killed instantly. The helicopter carrying his parents was redirected to land at another location to avoid them seeing their deceased son. Following the incident, the pilot was arrested and charged with manslaughter. Police argue that there was no circumstance under which a passenger should have been allowed to get out of the helicopter while the rotor blades were still moving. It would have taken the blades around 2 minutes to stop after the engine had been turned off. An investigation was launched to determine whether or not the pilot had instructed the passengers to prematurely exit the aircraft. Number 1. K. Sanjeev. A young Indian man from Tamil Nadu was taking a selfie when he fell into an irrigation well on May the 14th of 2021. The 20-year-old, only identified as K. Sanjeev, had been visiting a nearby farm with friends when he hopped onto a tractor. Witnesses later claimed that after starting the vehicle, he began taking selfies on his cell phone. Then as the tractor started to move backwards, Sanjeev fell into a well which was 120 feet deep and filled with 35 feet of water. Farm workers called police and fire rescue services for help. 8 officers arrived on the scene, but it was too late to save Sanjeev, who drowned in the well. The officers worked for 4 hours to drain it before they were able to retrieve the young man's body. Number 8. Tamara Thomas and Erica Rayner. In the summer of 2022, 2 Florida women were arrested for carrying out several 7-Eleven robberies in Lee County. The suspects were identified as Tamara Thomas and Erica Rayner, both aged 26, who were well organized in their criminal activity. They were caught on surveillance cameras walking into the 7-Eleven near Gladiolus and Summerlin in South Fort Myers. Thomas and Rayner wore masks while clad in black from head to toe and had also fitted their getaway vehicle with stolen plates in an effort to elude the authorities. One of them used a gun and demanded cash, while the other ripped off as many lottery tickets as possible. That same morning on July the 27th, they'd also robbed a 7-Eleven located at 11891 Palm Beach Boulevard, from which they'd also made off with cash and lottery tickets. The police additionally connected them to a previous 7-Eleven robbery which had occurred on July the 8th. The 2 were eventually arrested after law enforcement conducted a traffic stop on the gray sedan they'd used in the spree. A search warrant was executed at their home and produced the stolen lottery tickets, as well as the handgun with which they'd held up the stores. Thomas and Rayner each faced 3 charges of armed robbery and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Number 7. Cassandra Garza Rangel and Jasmine Arlene Rojas. Teenager Cassandra Garza Rangel and her accomplice, 23-year-old Jasmine Arlene Rojas, were taken into custody by law enforcement in Laredo, Texas, for attempting to rob a man with whom they'd had intimate relations. The incident occurred on September the 14th of 2022, and as reported by the victim, he'd first picked up Garza Rangel in the evening. They had intercourse in an abandoned building, and later on the teen called him asking to give her and Rojas a lift to a dollar store. He parked the car in a dark and empty lot near the store, and the duo told him to join them in the back seat. The man then became intimate with both. At some point, Rojas wanted to blindfold him with her red top, but the man refused and tried to leave the vehicle. It was then that Rojas produced a knife, grabbed the victim by the shirt and told him that they were going to kidnap and kill him. He managed to get away just as Rojas instructed her accomplice to retrieve a handgun from her purse. The victim then called 911. Following the female duo's arrest, they gave a dramatically different account of the events. Rojas claimed that the man had offered them a lift, but then pulled out a condom, which caused them to fear that he was going to assault them. She went on to state that she'd asked Garza Rangel to brandish a gun, expecting that they'd have to act in self-defense. The stories, however, were riddled with inconsistencies, amplified by the fact that the man's wallet and ID were found in the teenager's possession. The duo consequently faced charges of aggravated robbery. Number 6. Lindsay Garza and Emily Gonzalez. 2 Texas women were arrested in early January of 2022 in San Marcos after they'd robbed a restaurant and then engaged local police in a high-speed chase. 29-year-old Lindsay Garza and accomplice Emily Gonzalez, aged 31, entered a restaurant called Fuego, fired a weapon and then demanded cash. Shortly after the duo had fled the scene, the authorities were alerted and caught up with them on I-35. During the resulting pursuit, the women reached speeds of up to 94 miles per hour prior to crashing into a concrete barrier. They then tried escaping on foot but were eventually taken into custody by the San Marcos Police Department. Officers recovered the weapon as well as the stolen money, while the duo consequently faced charges of aggravated robbery, evading arrest, and tampering with evidence. Number 5. Kimberly LeBron Martinez and Elizabeth Laib. In the fall of 2021, an unnamed man visiting Miami Beach from Texas was approached in the 1000 block of Collins Avenue by 2 women who asked him if he wanted to join them for drinks. The tourist told Kimberly LeBron Martinez and Elizabeth Laib, aged 20 and 19, that he wasn't interested in drinking, but agreed to accompany them. They went to a bar and later on bought some White Claws before heading to Collins Park along 21st Street. The man eventually accepted a drink from LeBron Martinez. He would later remember that he immediately felt like he'd been drugged and soon became unconscious. While he was passed out, LeBron Martinez and Laib robbed him of several valuables that included a gold chain, Yeezy sneakers, an Apple iPhone, and his $10,000 Omega Seamaster watch. The women then went on a spending spree, making multiple fraudulent transactions with the victim's credit and debit cards, racking charges in excess of $15,000. The police tracked down the criminal duo due to the fact that they were wearing the same clothes as seen in the surveillance footage from the bar they'd visited with the victim. They were arrested and interrogated by detectives, whereupon LeBron Martinez admitted to the scheme, claiming she'd slipped a mixture of water and crushed Xanax into the victim's drink. The 2 women subsequently faced multiple felony charges in connection to the robbery. Number 4. Amber Mullins and Ashley Klein. A violent argument erupted between South Carolina woman Amber Mullins and her live-in boyfriend, whose identity wasn't released, at their Myrtle Beach home on September the 8th of 2022. She confronted the man for cheating on her with 27-year-old Ashley Klein, who was in their bedroom as the dispute unfolded. As later revealed by an arrest warrant, Mullins told her boyfriend, "I've got something for you," before she went and retrieved a knife from the kitchen. It wasn't clear if Klein had been aware that the man was in a relationship prior to their tryst, but she actively participated in what followed. She held the victim down as 22-year-old Mullins proceeded to stab him, inflicting non-fatal injuries to his leg and neck. Mullins was at the time on home detention after being arrested by Horry County Police and charged with attempted murder. The incident had occurred in June of that year in the area of Walker-Moore Boulevard when Mullins reportedly shot at 2 people from her car. For the attack on her boyfriend, she was charged with assault and battery of a high and aggravated nature, as well as possession of a weapon during a dangerous crime. Klein was later released on a $7,500 personal recognizance bond after she too had been arrested on the former charge. Number 3. Antonetta Stevens and Janine Gonzalez. At around 1 p.m. on August 11th of 2022, police in Gwinnett County, Georgia, were called to an apartment complex near the 2900 block of Buford Drive. 30-year-old Ashley Bocanegra had been left in critical condition following a physical altercation with a female duo. Bocanegra was struggling to breathe after she had suffered broken ribs and a ruptured liver in the fight. She died in a local hospital before surgery could be performed on her. An investigation later revealed that the victim's boyfriend, who wasn't named, was also involved with another woman, 27-year-old Antonetta Stevens. She was friends with the man's sister, teenager Janine Gonzalez. The female duo lured Bocanegra to the apartment complex with the intention of attacking her in connection to the love triangle. They took the woman's phone and then viciously beat her, inflicting the injuries that ultimately ended her life. Gonzalez's brother, who was also in the apartment at the time of the attack, was left with wounds all over his back and shoulders after he tried to intervene. Bocanegra, who shared a 7-year-old son with the man, had reportedly moved to Georgia from New York seeking a better life for her child. A GoFundMe was subsequently set up to pay for her funeral costs and to help transport her body back to her home state. Number 2. Stacy Rodriguez and Hosanna Varela. In the early morning hours of October the 6th of 2021, firefighters in Greeley, Colorado, arrived at a house in the 2400 block of 15th Avenue Court to find it fully engulfed in flames. After extinguishing the blaze, they discovered the charred remains of a man inside the residence. The manner of death for 35-year-old Chris Dickerson was subsequently listed as homicide, and an autopsy determined that he'd been fatally stabbed in the neck prior to the fire's onset. An investigation launched by Greeley police led them to suspects Stacy Rodriguez and Hosanna Varela, aged 19 and 23, whom video surveillance had captured at the home on the morning of the fire. They were booked into the Weld County Jail on suspicion of first-degree murder, arson and burglary, as well as tampering with evidence. Their connection to the victim remained unclear, and neither of them had a criminal background. As of the latest information available on the women's case, the hearings had been set for the summer of 2022. Number 1. Eleanor Ashford and Sarah Canseri. Australian couple Eleanor Ashford and Sarah Canseri were arrested in March of 2021 for a string of armed robberies conducted in the southwest Sydney area over the course of only 2 hours. Ashford and Canseri, both aged 23, were described by local media as an Instagram influencer couple, and the former was identified as the daughter of a well-known surgeon in Wollongong. The duo used a variety of tools in the robberies, including knives, a hammer, and a rusty axe. Just before midnight on March the 25th, Ashford and Canseri robbed a gas station on Heathcote Road in the suburb of Moorebank. Witnesses at the scene later reported that the women threatened the cashier, demanding cash and cigarettes, before fleeing in a Mitsubishi Lancer. While investigating the first crime, law enforcement received a second call from a gas station on Nuwara Road, reporting another robbery. Then, at around 1:15 a.m., officials were alerted that an employee from a station on Camden Valley Way had been threatened with a hammer and robbed. The female duo said to have been responsible matched the description of the suspects from the previous 2 incidents. CCTV photos later shared to the media showed the armed couple, who were wearing headscarves, as they carried out one of the robberies. Not long after the third incident, law enforcement stopped the Lancer, and the search of it yielded the weapons used in the spree, as well as the cash and cigarettes they'd stolen. The couple were taken into custody on charges of armed robbery. "22-year-old Sabrina Liaiti was sitting outside her family home in Manaus, Brazil, in November of 2018 when she was approached by 2 young men on a motorbike. The thugs demanded she hand over her cell phone, unaware that Liaiti had been practicing Brazilian Jiu Jitsu since she was a teenager. One of the muggers, 18-year-old Magdil da Silva, would come to publicly regret his decision. Liaiti, who'd had 4 of her cell phones stolen in past home invasions, quickly threw the phone in her house and then charged at the men. Da Silva's unidentified accomplice managed to flee on the motorbike, and Da Silva tried to run away on foot, but a neighbor of Liaiti's who'd witnessed the incident blocked him with his car. Liaiti reached the would-be mugger, took him to the pavement and placed him in an armbar, a jiu-jitsu hold that involves using leverage from the hip and legs to trap the arm and potentially even break it at the elbow. Bystanders filmed Da Silva as he screamed in pain and repeatedly cried out, "No more," while Liaiti applied pressure to his arm. At one point, the young woman placed him in a wrist hold as well. She kept Da Silva immobilized until law enforcement arrived at the scene and arrested him for attempted robbery. Liaiti later spoke to a media outlet about the incident and expressed having been fully aware of the dangers, noting that she wouldn't have fought back if the men had been armed. Number 7. Ali Naji. On December the 17th of 2022, a man walked into the Dearborn Police Department in Michigan armed with a concealed 9mm handgun. Once inside the lobby, 33-year-old Ali Naji pulled out the weapon and aimed it at the officer behind the desk, who was standing behind bulletproof glass, about 5 feet from him. Naji, who'd stolen the gun earlier in the day, squeezed the trigger, but the gun jammed. Surveillance video would show the police officer, whose identity wasn't revealed, as he slid open a window in the bullet-resistant panel and shot Naji multiple times. He passed away in a local hospital. As per protocol, the officer was placed on paid administrative leave. Michigan State Police launched an investigation to determine Naji's motive for the attempted ambush attack. although early reports indicated that mental illness might have been a factor. Number 6. Philip Hollis. A former British train driver was sentenced to 12 months in prison, suspended for 2 years, at Liverpool Crown Court in March of 2022. A year prior, on March the 13th, Philip Hollis was operating a train due to arrive at Kirby Station in Knowsley, Merseyside. The expected time of arrival was 6:52 p.m. As shown by a subsequent examination of his phone, Hollis had been exchanging WhatsApp messages about the recent death of motor racing commentator Murray Walker. Hollis sent a message at 6:51 as he was driving between stations and heading into Kirby. His decision to engage in the conversation, coupled with him reaching for a bag that had fallen on the floor, would prove disastrous, as the distraction translated to him failing to slow down the train. The speed limit for the approach was regulated at 15 miles per hour, but Hollis was driving at 40 miles per hour and only hit the emergency brakes about 60 feet from the start of the platform. The train crashed through the buffers and the metal frame at the end of the line, causing significant damage, which was estimated at over $500,000. The authorities determined that it was through sheer luck that the 12 passengers on board weren't seriously injured. Hollis, whom was reportedly left with PTSD by the incident, pleaded guilty to endangering the safety of people conveyed by railway. Number 5. Philip Nicholas Castabanis. Florida gangster rapper Philip Nicholas Castabanis was spotted by Miami law enforcement pulling out of a Whole Foods parking lot in early 2017. Castabanis, who performed as Stitches, was recognized by his extensive face tattoos, the most distinctive of which was a stitched-up, scarred smile around his mouth. He was stopped after parking his Porsche in a disabled space, an initial bad decision upon which he gradually built during his interaction with the police. The 21-year-old rapper denied having a gun on him upon questioning him and passed an officer a partially smoked joint, saying, "Sorry, officer." However, as law enforcement searched his car, they found a Glock handgun under his seat and 2 magazines loaded with a combined 46 rounds. Castabanis, who often rapped about gun violence and selling drugs, reacted to the discovery by apologizing and saying that he'd thought they were asking about a gun on his person and not in his car. Additionally, a jar with nearly 40 grams of marijuana was recovered from the Porsche. At the time, Castabanis was best known for his song "Brick in Yo Face," which had been viewed millions of times on YouTube and was known to pass out drugs to audience members during his concerts. He had prior arrests and, for the latest offenses, was booked for gun and drug possession. Number 4. San Diego gun owner. In 2019, a trend emerged within Facebook groups populated by gun enthusiasts, of them posting photos with loaded firearms aimed at their crotches, with the safety off and the finger on the trigger. The trend was said to have been related to infighting among members of gun groups, particularly as a reaction to the insistence of some owners for trigger discipline. The latter refers to always keeping one's finger off the trigger until ready to open fire. Veteran owners regarded the emphasis on safety as one of annoying obviousness and started uploading the dangerous selfies to get a rise out of owners they regarded as normies for their concerns. Before long, groups exclusively dedicated to the trend started forming. The practice went horribly wrong for one such group member from San Diego, California in August of 2020. He'd uploaded a video of himself pointing his .45 caliber M1911 semi-automatic pistol at his manhood. The gun then discharged. A few moments later, he posted updates to the group, one of which was a photo of his exposed legs with a towel pressed in between them, drops of blood on the floor, and a crumpled copy of the U.S. Constitution. He insisted that it wasn't a joke and wrote that the bullet had hit his scrotum, mattress, box spring, and floor. The man later offered updates from a hospital gurney, revealing that what he'd initially thought had been 2 graze wounds was actually an exit and entrance hole, as the bullet had gone through the skin. He was hailed as a king by the group, and an admin later revealed he'd fully recovered from his gunshot injury. Number 3. Frank Blake. While Virginia man Frank Blake was in prison at Henrico County Jail for an unspecified crime in the summer of 2015, he was visited by two women. Both of them claimed to be married to him. As officials looked into the 33-year-old's complicated matrimonial history, they found that the women were his second wife, whom he'd never divorced, and his third wife. However, the authorities also discovered that Blake had married the second woman in September of 2012, before his divorce from his first wife had gone through. Blake was charged with 1 count of bigamy and insisted in court that he didn't know he was committing a felony. Moreover, he claimed that he thought his second marriage didn't count, as it had only lasted for 2 weeks. He referred to his third wife, Jessica, as the woman he loved and with whom he wanted to be with. Blake asked for a lie detector to prove his supposed ignorance, adding, "I ain't no cheater," but eventually pleaded no contest to bigamy and was sentenced to 18 months in prison. Number 2. Peter Addison. In 2007, English teenager Peter Addison and a few of his friends raided an underprivileged children's centre in Adlington, Cheshire. In addition to stealing several items, 18-year-old Addison and his friend, Mark Ridgway, also 18, smashed dishware and caused further destruction by letting off fire extinguishers. Before leaving, Addison wrote on a wall in black marker, "Peter Addison was here," as well as "Thanks for the stay." When a volunteer discovered the ransacked site the following day, she assumed that the name on the wall was meant as a decoy to derail law enforcement from finding the real burglars. She reacted in disbelief upon learning that Addison had written his actual name. It only took the police a quick search in a database to find him. His guilt was further underlined by the fact that he was wearing a t-shirt he'd stolen from the center when law enforcement approached him. Both he and Ridgway admitted burglary in the aftermath. Addison was ordered to pay nearly $1,000 in compensation and was given a 1-year conditional discharge, while his partner in crime was also asked to pay compensation and perform 60 hours of unpaid work. Reacting to the incident, a Cheshire police inspector told a media outlet, "There are some pretty stupid criminals around, but to leave your own name at the scene of the crime takes the biscuit." Number 1. Zapher Kuzu. 24-year-old Turkish man Zapher Kuzu was sentenced to community service in 2019 after he'd been convicted of wounding in the city of Erzurum in the country's northeast. He decided to get out of the court-mandated work and put together a dangerous plan that he hoped would see him hospitalized. Kuzu called 2 friends and asked one of them to shoot him in the back with a shotgun so that he'd be injured and thus considered unfit to serve out the remainder of his sentence. His unidentified companions strapped 2 pillows to his back, believing they'd absorb the brunt of the blast's impact. Kuzu's friend, who was only reported as being 18 years old, then shot him. The buckshot ripped through the improvised padding and left Kuzu with critical injuries. His friends tried to take him to a local hospital, but he died before they could leave the house. The emergency services removed Kuzu's body from the home and subsequently sent it for an autopsy at the Forensic Medical Institute in Istanbul. The shotgun was seized by law enforcement and Kuzu's companions were arrested. Number 7. Umar Mirza. On March 27th of 2017, a man wearing a hood and a mask burst into a Paddy Power betting shop in Birmingham, England. He brandished a gun and demanded a female worker open the safe, then forced her to fill a carrier bag with $21,628 in cash, $466 in coins, and also $259 taken from the register. The robber removed his disguise as he left the establishment, and management was able to quickly identify him from CCTV footage as 26-year-old Umar Mirza. It later emerged that the man had made the starkly uninspired decision of robbing the same gambling parlor where he'd previously left a resume containing all of his personal information. He'd failed to secure the job, but it wasn't specified how much time had elapsed since he'd left the application. The police raided his home and found the carrier bag, an imitation firearm, and a betting slip on which he'd written, "I have got a gun. Open the door or I will shoot you." Mirza, who was described by his lawyer as a gambling addict, admitted robbery and possessing an imitation firearm and was jailed for 6 years at Birmingham Crown Court on August the 18th of that same year. Number 6. Annabella Dukes. A New Mexico teenager and her boyfriend were charged with murder in January of 2022, following a failed hostage scheme. A combination of successive, ill-fated decisions eventually resulted in the death of 24-year-old former correction officer Elias Otero. In February of 2021, his brother Nicholas was lured by 18-year-old Annabella Dukes to a late-night in-person meeting at an address in Albuquerque she'd claimed was her home. They then drove to Alvarado Park in Nicholas's red Lexus. As he later told the police, his suspicions had begun to mount as Dukes asked him about the necklace he was wearing, where he kept his cash, and if he had a gun in the car. Nicholas then spotted the teen secretly calling someone later identified as her boyfriend, Adrian Avila, on her cell phone and letting him listen to their conversation. By the time Nicholas realized he was being set up, a second vehicle approached his from behind. He was robbed at gunpoint by Avila and an accomplice before being forcefully driven to the home of his older brother, Elias. It was there that the kidnappers threatened to kill Nicholas unless Elias gave them more money. The latter emerged from the residence with a gun and warned the other men he was going to shoot them. Avila then opened fire on Elias, killing him in the street. Nicholas jumped from the car as the suspects fled and later alerted the authorities. Dukes had used Snapchat in order to initially lure Nicholas, thus leaving a traceable digital footprint. Through the social media platform, she'd also tricked a victim in a previous carjacking of the very same vehicle that was used to kidnap Nicholas. Avila turned himself into the authorities in late December and Dukes was arrested the following month. They were each charged with murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, tampering with evidence, and conspiracy. Number 5. Bridget Ann Barnett. Alabama woman Bridget Ann Barnett was arrested by authorities in Tuscaloosa in January of 2013 after investigators found that she'd been selling marijuana out of a house across the street from a police station. It's unclear if the woman had been deliberately conducting the operation from the strategic perspective of hiding in plain sight, or if she'd been simply unaware of her proximity to the law enforcement headquarters. Sergeant Brent Blankley with Tuscaloosa Police described the 24-year-old's choice of location as very surprising after agents from the West Alabama Narcotics Task Force had executed a search warrant at the address and found marijuana along with drug paraphernalia. A graphic from Google Maps provided by the authorities showed that the house on Mill Creek Lane was only about the width of a parking lot from the station. Barnett was booked into Tuscaloosa County Jail on an $81,000 bond after being charged with 2 counts of first-degree distribution of marijuana, 1 count of possession of marijuana, and 1 count of possession of drug paraphernalia. Number 4. Deborah Hamill. On July the 16th of 2019, an Oklahoma woman had the very bad idea of fleeing from a police officer who conducted a traffic stop and then attacking him, even though she only risked an $80 fine for a broken tail light. The interaction was captured in its entirety by Officer Charles Missine's body cam. He asked 65-year-old Deborah Hamill about the faulty equipment, and she replied that the tail light had been out for 6 months but maintained she was going to fix it. Hamill then grew agitated when Missine wrote her an $80 ticket and refused to sign it. As tensions escalated, the officer ordered the woman to get out of the car and told her she was under arrest. Hamill didn't comply, told the officer to shut up, and then drove away. Missine got into his vehicle and chased her for several minutes. After Hamill eventually pulled over, he commanded her to exit the vehicle with his weapon drawn, but she continued being uncooperative. Missine holstered the firearm, then pulled the woman out of the car and pushed her onto the ground. Hamill rolled onto her back and, according to court documents, kicked the officer in the groin region, telling him, "I said leave me alone and I mean it." It was at that point that Missine pulled out his taser and fired it at Hamill, leaving her writhing in pain. Once handcuffed and inside the police cruiser, Hamill told the officer that he didn't have to use his taser on her, but Missine defended his actions, pointing to the woman's repeated defiance. When the officer mentioned the fact that she'd kicked him, Hamill claimed to have done so because she was a country girl. The encounter, which could have ended in a fine for the woman, concluded with her facing a charge of misdemeanor resisting arrest as well as a felony charge of battery or assault and battery on a police officer. Number 3. Clint Butler. In 2020, British man Clint Butler was serving a 17-year sentence for robbery and firearms offenses at the Spring Hill open prison in Buckinghamshire, England. The convicted man, reported as being in his mid-30s, was expected to be released in 2024, but he escaped from prison at midnight on November the 28th. A major police manhunt ensued that for nearly 2 months made no significant progress. It was by chance occurrence and a very bad idea on Butler's part that he was eventually brought back into custody. On January the 13th of 2021, while patrolling in the area of Martineau Way in Birmingham city centre, police constables Mark Owen and Alison Brown spotted 2 men. One of them abruptly changed direction upon being approached by the officers. Pandemic lockdown restrictions had been in place since January the 4th, with people urged to remain at home and only shop for basic necessities. Owen and Brown turned their body cameras on, then asked the pair why they were out and not adhering to the restrictions in place. One of the men, who would be later revealed as Butler, told them that he'd been shopping for the new Call of Duty game. Owen then informed the pair that he was going to check their personal information. In the moments that followed, as shown by body cam footage, Butler kicked Owen in the groin, but then slipped on the pavement while attempting to run away. The officers tackled him to the ground, and in the struggle that followed, Butler punched Brown in the face. The law enforcement officers called for backup and were assisted by nearby security guards towards incapacitating Butler. After being placed in handcuffs, he gave the officers a false name and admitted that he had cannabis on him, before eventually confessing that he was on the run. He was jailed for 13 months for absconding from prison and 6 months for assaulting the officers, with the sentences ordered to be served consecutively. West Midlands Police Superintendent Nick Rowe described Butler's decision to go out with a friend and buy a game in the middle of a lockdown while he was on the run from the authorities as idiotic and a mystery. Number 2. Douglas Peter Kelly. A Florida man was arrested for drug possession in 2018 after asking the police to test his methamphetamine and telling them he intended to press charges against his dealer. The bewildering case was shared on social media by the Putnam County Sheriff's Office, and it involved 49-year-old Douglas Peter Kelly. He reportedly called detectives in the drug unit and told them he'd suffered a violent reaction after smoking the methamphetamine he'd purchased a week earlier. Kelly wanted investigators to examine the product so that he could take legal action against the dealer for selling him the wrong drug. The detectives, albeit taken aback by the call, were happy to oblige and told Kelly to come down to the station, which he did. The man handed them a clear, crystal-like substance wrapped in aluminium foil that was later confirmed as methamphetamine. Kelly was arrested for possession and taken next door to the Putnam County Jail. In the viral Facebook post, the department encouraged others to come forward with their drugs, expressing the officers' readiness to assist them if they suspected to have been misled in their illegal purchase. Number 1. Cameron Jeffrey Wilson. 27-year-old Cameron Jeffrey Wilson ended up in the custody of authorities in Washington through a series of blunders that had begun with him accidentally shooting himself in the testicles. On April the 5th of 2019, while at his Kashmir home, Wilson was carrying a handgun in his front pocket when the weapon went off, releasing a bullet that pierced his groin and thigh. The 13-time convicted felon told his girlfriend to get rid of the gun and then went to the hospital. Court records detail that as Wilson was being treated for the gunshot wound, a balloon of marijuana slipped out of his backside. He fled the scene but left his car behind, and police officers, who'd previously been alerted of the gunshot wound, searched the vehicle. They found a bag of methamphetamine in the blood-stained jeans that Wilson had been wearing when he shot himself. Law enforcement issued an arrest warrant, and on April the 18th, Wilson surrendered. He was taken for processing at the Chelan County Regional Justice Center where, as the man was being strip-searched, yet another bag of marijuana slipped out of his backside. The sequence of very bad ideas continued, with Wilson placing several calls out of the jail, asking his girlfriend not to cooperate with the authorities. In spite of his lengthy criminal experience, Wilson failed to realize that the authorities were listening in on the calls. Wilson was held on a $110,000 bail after being charged with possession of a firearm, unlawful possession of meth, possession of a controlled substance in a correctional facility, and 4 counts of tampering with a witness. Number 13. Wayne Roth. In November of 1997, Pennsylvania man Wayne Roth was at the home of his friend Roger Croteau, who had a pet cobra. Roth decided that he wanted to play with the highly venomous reptile. He reached into the tank, but the cobra perceived him as a threat and bit the 38-year-old as he picked it up. In spite of his friend's warnings and against what most would argue as common sense, Roth didn't go to the emergency room. Instead, he believed that he'd be able to withstand the reptile's venom, reportedly telling his friend, "I'm a man, I can handle it." Instead of the hospital, Roth went to a bar where he had a few drinks and boasted to other patrons about having just been bit by a cobra. The animal's venom attacks the central nervous system, but it's generally rather slow-acting. In spite of Roth's belief in his masculine imperviousness, he ended up dying a few hours later. Number 12. Stephen Winfrey. On New Year's Day 2015, British man Stephen Winfrey was hunting for rabbits near his home in Doncaster, South Yorkshire. On January the 2nd, a passerby found the 50-year-old man with half his body sticking out of a rabbit hole. Winfrey's head was inside, while only his legs and torso were visible. The man had been dead for several hours. The ferrets he'd been using to hunt were found in bags while his dog was discovered tied to a tree nearby. Next to the man's lifeless body was a mound of soil and a dead rabbit. Judging by the scratch marks on the ground, Winfrey had struggled to get out, but his efforts were to no avail. He'd succumbed to asphyxia after sticking his head inside the hole and becoming stuck. Number 11. Daniel Kaluuya. On January the 14th of 2021, a teenager from Benadibeli region in the Democratic Republic of Congo died after striking a soccer ball filled with hardened concrete. The team that 18-year-old Daniel Kaluuya played for had brought the ball and intended to use it to prank their opponents. However, the players then decided to warm up using the concrete ball and to test their abilities to kick it. Kaluuya called for a header and his teammate passed accordingly. The teenager struck the ball with his head and the impact inflicted severe injuries. Kaluuya died as a result, while the player who passed the ball to him reportedly faced charges. Number 10. Quimby Gilotti. On June the 2nd of 1997, teenager Quimby Gilotti died in an accident involving 32 other students from California's Napa High School. They were on a senior class trip to Concord's Waterworld, USA. The students wanted to see how many of them could fit on a single section of the 40-foot-high Banzai Pipeline water slide. By piling into it, they subjected the attraction to weight forces 3 times greater than those for which it had been designed. A section of the slide broke open and twisted upside down as it fell, sending students plummeting to the ground. 18-year-old Gilotti died, while over a dozen students were hospitalized as a result of the accident. Number 9. Mauled by Bengal tigers. In May of 1999, 2 elderly German tourists were mauled to death by 3 Bengal tigers at a wildlife park in Spain's Alicante province. The unnamed married couple, both reported as being in their 70s, ignored the warnings issued by staff at Safari El Virgil. The park's safety guidelines stated that visitors should drive on the grounds with their windows rolled up. Signs written in multiple languages informed the couple that they were in a dangerous area and under no circumstances were they to exit their vehicle. Even though their lives were at stake, they still got out of their car. Before long, 3 massive Bengal tigers pounced on them. The felines swiftly inflicted devastating neck injuries, to which the man and his wife would later succumb. Number 8. Explosive selfies. In January of 2015, 2 young men traveling in Russia's Ural Mountains found a live grenade and decided to take a selfie with it. Some sources report that they discovered the explosive weapon without a safety pin, while others claim that they'd pulled the pin out specifically for the selfie. Whatever the case might have been, a grenade without a safety on is extremely dangerous, as this means it's armed and ready for use. Both men were instantly obliterated as the grenade went off in their faces. Only the phone with the picture remained and served as evidence of how they died. In 2017, another grenade selfie went horribly wrong. Russian man Alexander Chechich had sent photos to a friend of him holding the armed explosive in his hand. It's believed that the man couldn't put the safety pin back in, at which point the weapon went off, killing Chechich by tearing his body in half. Number 7. Clifford Ray Jones. In 2016, Detroit man Clifford Ray Jones died in a car crash under rather unusual circumstances. He was watching an X-rated movie on his phone while driving down I-75 without wearing pants. Jones's seatbelt wasn't fastened, and the roof on his 1996 Toyota was open. At some point, the 58-year-old had become too distracted and crashed into a roadway ramp. His vehicle rolled and Jones was ejected through the sunroof, sustained in fatal injuries. Upon reaching the crash site, one Michigan State Police lieutenant referred to the incident as the strangest thing he'd ever encountered on the roadway. Number 6. David Monk. British man David Monk died in the Italian Alps in 2008 from an accident involving an improvised sled. 46-year-old Monk and a few of his friends had removed some of the foam barriers that were used as protection at the end of the run. The men then used them as sledges and sped down the ski slope. In a dark, ironic twist, the men crashed into the very fence from where they'd earlier removed the foam barriers. Monk struck a post with his head and was killed instantly. 2 of his friends were also badly injured, but they survived. Number 5. Jose Tony Alvarez Umanzor. On the 4th of July 2020, a man from Washington, D.C. died in the aftermath of a mishap with fireworks. 33-year-old Jose Tony Alvarez Umanzor was reportedly holding a commercial-grade firework above his head. The mortar-style pyrotechnic device was described as being so powerful that it was deemed illegal in the state. Nevertheless, Umanzor held it above his head after lighting it. Once ignited, the base of the firework ejected downwards, causing critical injuries to the man's head and upper body. Umanzor was rushed to the hospital where he was ultimately pronounced dead. Number 4. Sukram Yadav. In January of 2021, Indian man Sukram Yadav died after what was described as an air compressor enema. The incident occurred in the Katni district of the Madhya Pradesh state. Yadav had been suffering from constipation and asked his friend, 35-year-old Vino Thakur, to help him resolve the matter by inserting an air compressor nozzle into his rectum. Thakur did as asked, and within seconds Yadav's stomach swelled up and he became unconscious. He was rushed to the emergency room and later transferred to a different hospital, where doctors performed 3 surgeries in an attempt to save his life. Unfortunately, the man succumbed to his extensive internal injuries. Even though the matter was attributed to ignorance rather than malevolence, Thakur was arrested by the police. Number 3. Cynthia Covert. In May of 2020, Cynthia Covert was visiting a friend on Kiowa Island near Charleston, South Carolina. At some point, the 58-year-old beautician saw an alligator near the pond behind her friend's house. Covert decided that she wanted to pet the beast, which is frequently mentioned among the deadliest predators in North America. Her friend warned Covert that she'd witnessed the alligator snatch a deer from the water's edge only a few days prior. The woman replied that she didn't look like a deer and proceeded with her plan of touching the animal. It was still immersed in the water when Covert bent over and reached out to pet it. In an instant, the beast lunged at the woman, clamped on her leg, and dragged her in the pond. A struggle ensued, from which Covert emerged, albeit briefly. She only had the chance to jokingly claim that she won't do that again, before the alligator bit her once more. The attack ended with the beast dragging the woman underwater and drowning her. It was later reportedly killed by local wildlife officers, even though it was argued that the beast had simply done what was inherent to its predatory nature. Number 2. Henry Hill Jr. In November of 2020, a man from Kershaw County, South Carolina, died in a fire under what was deemed as entirely preventable circumstances. 68-year-old Henry Hill Jr. had become trapped in his trailer home when it caught fire in the early hours of the morning. Hill and 2 others managed to get out. However, according to the responding firefighters and witnesses from the scene, Hill went back inside the flaming structure to retrieve a pair of pants. The man was found dead on the bedroom floor after succumbing to the intense heat and smoke inhalation. Number 1. Michael Anderson Godwin. In the 1980s, Michael Anderson Godwin was convicted of murder and sentenced to death via the electric chair. However, that verdict was eventually overturned on appeal, and Godwin was given life in prison in 1983. Still, Godwin would end up dying of electrocution several years later. In 1989, the 28-year-old was sitting on a steel toilet in his cell. At the same time, he was trying to repair a pair of headphones that were still connected to his TV set. Godwin would make the fatal mistake of biting into the cable while trying to split and reconnect it. He sustained a massive electric shock and was found dead in his cell at the Central Correctional Institution in South Carolina. The combination of conducting metal and the frayed cable essentially meant that Godwin had died on an electric chair of his own inadvertent design. Number 12. Jamie Coots. Jamie Coots was a 42-year-old snake-handling pastor who died in 2014 from a rattlesnake bite incurred during a church service at the Full Gospel Tabernacle in Jesus' Name Church in Middlesborough, Kentucky. Coots was an experienced snake handler who'd been handling snakes for nearly 20 years when he was bitten for the 9th and final time. Coots had gained some notability after he was featured in National Geographic Channel's reality show Snake Salvation, which documented the lives of people who practice snake handling. Coots' religious conviction was based on a passage in Mark's Gospel which reads, "They shall take up serpents, and if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. They shall lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover." Fellow preacher Cody Wynn told the news station that he had one of the rattlers in his hand. It just turned its head and bit him in the back of the hand within a second. Coots might have survived had his relatives not refused medical treatment for him, saying it was inconsistent with his religion. A year later, in an event that much reminded people of Coots' incident, a snake-handling pastor in Pretoria, South Africa, reportedly died. Penwell Mnguni claimed he could turn snakes into chocolate and was feeding them to his congregants, along with rats and toilet paper. According to various news reports, he too was bitten by one of his own snakes, a cobra, and he too refused treatment, succumbing to his injuries not long after. In true miraculous fashion, Mnguni turned out to be alive still after all and was last reported feeding frogs, worms, octopi, and dog meat and blood to his congregants. Number 11. Eric Barcia. In the late 1990s, Virginia man Eric Barcia died in an accident involving a homemade bungee rope. Instead of using a factory-produced shock cord, the 22-year-old fast food worker taped together a number of elastic ropes. The stretchy strands, which typically have hooks at their ends, are normally used to secure objects. Not only was his contraption extremely unsafe, but Barcia also critically miscalculated the length of rope that he needed before going on a railroad trestle at Lake Ocoting Park in Fairfax County. Barcia tied one end to his foot and anchored the other to the trestle. He then jumped 70 feet, or about twice the height of a telephone pole, towards the pavement below. Since the length of his homemade cord exceeded the distance he traveled towards the ground, Barcia struck the pavement and died on the spot. Number 10. Cedric Jelks. In 2017, Florida man Cedric Jelks faced firearm possession charges after accidentally sitting on his gun. As 38-year-old Jelks got into his car, he forgot that his weapon was on the driver's seat. He unwittingly sat on the firearm, which had been left armed and without a safety on. It discharged, shooting him in the manhood. The incident reportedly occurred outside of his girlfriend's home. Jelks, who was left in agony, rushed into the bathroom, holding his groin, and his girlfriend then drove him to the hospital. He survived, but no updates were released regarding his condition, and it isn't known if he retained the functionality of his privates. Jelks' accident also had severe legal implications, as he'd been convicted of a cocaine-related crime in 2004. As a felon, it was illegal for him to own a gun, meaning that aside from excruciating pain, he also faced time in prison. Number 9. Gary Hoy. On July the 9th of 1993, Toronto lawyer Gary Hoy fell to his death from the 24th floor of his office building. Hoy was given a tour to a group of students and decided to show them a stunt he'd reportedly tried many times before. The 38-year-old told them that the windows of the Toronto Dominion Center were unbreakable, and to prove it, slammed his body against the glass. Like with Hoy's previous demonstrations, the glass didn't break, but unfortunately, he didn't bounce back to safety either. The impact was strong enough to pop the window out of its frame, and Hoy plummeted to his death. A structural engineer who commented on the case for a local media outlet claimed that he'd never heard of a building code that would allow a 160-pound or 72.5-kilogram man to run up against a glass and withstand it. Number 8. Sigurd Eysteinsson. Sigurd Eysteinsson was a 9th century Viking ruler who played a leading role in the conquest of what would later become northern Scotland. He expanded his territory from the islands of Orkney and Shetland into the mainland, and his military exploits led to him being known as Sigurd the Mighty. Towards the end of his reign, he challenged rival Mael Brigti the Bucktooth to battle. They agreed to each bring only 40 men to the confrontation. Sigurd, however, would treacherously come with double the amount of warriors. Mael Brigti was defeated and decapitated, with Sigurd attaching his severed head to his saddle as a trophy. Even though he triumphed over his rival, Sigurd's hubris would echo through the ages. As he rode, Mael Brigti's Bucktooth caught him on the leg. The wound became infected and ultimately led to Sigurd's death. Number 7. Bojan Birch. Croatian man Bojan Birch had spent 5 years behind bars in the city of Pula before an additional 8 months were added to his sentence for sending death letters to an ex-girlfriend. About 2 months before he was scheduled to be released, his behavior became increasingly more erratic, to the point that the guards decided to lock him in a rubber-padded cell. Even though he was in solitary confinement with both hands tied behind his back, Birch managed to pull out a lighter that he'd smuggled inside. He started a fire near the door, presumably in protest, or so that he'd be relocated to a regular cell. Security cameras captured the moment that the fire consumed the highly flammable materials. Before the guards noticed the smoke coming out of the cell, it was already too late. Some reports claimed that they'd purposefully delayed their intervention in order to teach Birch a lesson. Whatever the case might have been, the blaze rapidly extended and they could no longer enter the cell. Birch succumbed to smoke inhalation and his body was consumed by the flames. Number 6. Tetsu Shiohara. In late October of 2019, a Japanese man took on Mount Fuji outside of the regular climbing season and with minimal equipment. 47-year-old Tetsu Shiohara live-streamed his ill-fated adventure on Japan's tallest mountain. Climbing Mount Fuji is only permitted during the summer, when the snow melts and the huts are open. Shiohara had been on the mountain several times before, but trekking it outside of the warm months is considered extremely dangerous. In terms of preparedness for the treacherous slopes, Shiohara wasn't wearing crampons and had little else aside from a pair of hiking poles. He'd named his livestream "Let's Go to Snowy Mount Fuji," and a number of commenters online argued that the title itself denoted the level of ignorance with which he approached the climb. At one point, Shiohara claimed that his fingers had gone numb and expressed regrets at not having brought heat packs. Nevertheless, he prioritized filming instead of personal safety and kept heading towards the summit. After a grueling trek, Shiohara was only a few dozen feet from the top. The man passed the safety fence and then told his viewers that he'd reached a dangerous portion. Moments later, he started slipping, feet first, towards the clouds below. Shiohara failed to regain his footing and kept tumbling down the side of the mountain, while his phone was still recording. His lifeless body was discovered a few days later at an altitude of around 10,000 feet. Number 5. Dean Smith. In June of 2016, an Australian man was severely injured at a museum after running straight into a wall while racing a virtual athlete. Melbourne's Science Works Museum had a special installation in which visitors could attempt to beat a digital version of track legend Cathy Freeman in a race. In the interactive display, a series of images depicting Freeman would sequentially light up to mimic her speed. Visitor Dean Smith, who was in his early 40s, accepted the challenge. Unfortunately, Smith got a little overzealous in racing the digital gold medalist. As a result, he plowed headfirst into the wall at the end of the exhibit. The man was rushed to the hospital, where doctors told him he'd been millimeters away from becoming a paraplegic. He'd crushed a vertebra, fractured an occipital bone, and broken a rib. Smith also suffered a stroke from a crushed vertebral artery meant to supply blood to his brain. He was unable to work in the incident's aftermath. Smith eventually sued the museum, claiming that the inadequate lighting had prevented him from seeing the wall until it was too late. Number 4. Air freshener explosion. In 2019, a driver narrowly avoided death following a massive explosion that he'd triggered inside his car. The incident occurred in the town of Halifax in the United Kingdom. While in stationary traffic, The unnamed driver used an excessive amount of aerosol air freshener inside his car, even though it's general knowledge that the contents of such products are highly flammable. The man then lit up a cigarette. The ensuing blast was powerful enough to shatter the vehicle's windows, buckle its entire frame, and even damage the windows at nearby businesses. The driver was extremely fortunate, as he'd only escaped with minor injuries. Number 3. Aaron DeBella. In September of 2018, near Hull in Massachusetts, 21-year-old Aaron DeBella died after attempting to do a handstand on the bulwark of a cruise ship. DeBella and a few of his friends were on the cruise celebrating a birthday. He'd reportedly thought it would be funny to pretend that he was hanging off the side of the ship. The crew had spotted him attempting the dangerous stunt and told him to stop. DeBella initially complied, but about an hour later tried to do the handstand again. On his second attempt, the young man lost his balance and fell over. Life rings were thrown in his direction, while a crew member jumped in the water and got within a few feet of him. Unfortunately, he didn't reach DeBella in time, and he drowned. Number 2. French kings and door lintels. 2 French kings died under similarly avoidable circumstances several centuries apart. Louis III ruled West Francia in the late 9th century. The young king's reign, which only lasted about 3 years, was cut short by an accident involving a horse, a girl, and a door lintel. 17-year-old Louis was promenading through the Parisian commune of Saint Denis, which was at the center of his realm. A girl caught his eye, and as she headed towards her home, Louis mounted his horse to pursue her. As he was following the girl, he didn't notice a door lintel and hit his head on it. The impact threw Louis from his horse and he fell, breaking his skull. Over 600 years after his death, Charles VIII of France suffered a similar fate. He was going to watch a match of jeu de paume, which is an early version of tennis. On the way, Charles accidentally hit his head on a door lintel, sustaining massive cranial trauma. As he returned from the match, he abruptly fell into a coma and died several hours later. Number 1. Jaime Koznan. In 2018, a Malaysian man was strangled by a python that he was attempting to take home on his motorbike. 35-year-old Jaime Koznan, who was described as unemployed, spotted the 12-foot-long serpent on the side of the road and decided to capture it, believing he would be able to sell it. Koznan used gloves and a sickle to handle the python. He then drove away while holding it by its head. It wasn't long before the python started constricting him, thus causing Koznan to crash his motorbike. The animal continued to coil around Koznan, and he eventually succumbed to its powerful squeeze. A passerby spotted him the following day with the snake still wrapped around his lifeless body. Thanks for watching. What's the dumbest item or event that you've ever spent money on? Let us know in the comments section below.